In this video, I want to show you how to seal concrete cracks. I want to go over very large cracks up to around a ½ inch thick, as well as small hairline cracks. I'll also be repairing areas where huge chunks of concrete are missing, as well as how to grind down trip hazards. In this tutorial, I am using place sand, expanding foam, and foam rod as filler material, compressed air, a broom, self-leveling and non-self-leveling caulk sealant, as well as a caulk gun, a small spackle knife, a wire brush, and an angle grinder with a diamond cup turbo wheel and a diamond cutoff wheel. For the first step, I'm going to be removing any trip hazards. This is where one surface of the crack is much taller than the other surface. This will reduce the chance of tripping as well as allow wheels to pass over easily. This also aesthetically looks much better when the caulk sealant is applied. To do this, I'm starting out with the cutoff wheel. I'm just cutting a 45-degree angle into it and basically chamfering the edge. This is just to reduce it before I start grinding it. Once I've cut it at the angle, I take the turbo cup wheel and just grind it smooth, and I try to match it up level with the next surface and taper it out so there's no longer a trip hazard. After grinding it, I just took the wire wheel attachment and did a quick pass over it. This is just to remove any sharp edges. And here's the trip hazard after grinding it flat. This next part, I'm going to show how to prepare very small cracks. If they are less than a ½ inch, they will need to be opened up. The reason being is there's not enough surface area for the caulk to adhere to, and it'll quickly fail. So if they are small like this, they will need to be chased with a cutoff wheel. To do this, all you need to do is come in at a 45-degree angle with the cutoff wheel from each side of the crack and create a V shape. You could also buy a chasing wheel. It's very expensive, and the cutoff wheel works the exact same way, so this is what I used. You just need to go on one side of the crack and turn around and do the other side, and the end result will just be a V. I made mine about ½ inch wide and a ¼ inch deep or so. This next step is optional, but I took a pressure washer to all the cracks. This got off the loose bits of sand and concrete, and it also flushed out any debris like leaves and tree seeds. This removes any of the deeply embedded dirt along the cracks and will help with the caulk adhere as well. If you don't have access to a pressure washer, you could also blow them out or sweep them out. This is pretty much necessary just to clean them out to a minimum state where the caulk will adhere. To do this, you just take the air nozzle or a brush and just go along the crack. And here's an idea of what the cracks will look like after chasing them or removing any trip hazards and then cleaning them out. So now it's time to fill the larger cracks with some filler material, or for the small ones you could go straight to applying the caulk. To install the caulking, all you need to do is cut off the end. Most of these caulking guns have a built-in cutter, so there's a blade here like this, so watch your finger. Put it in here at an angle and it just cuts it like this. So now you have an opening, but there's still a foil seal on it, so it also comes with a built-in piece of wire that you could just pierce it. So just hit it a couple times and it should be good. You know you pierced it because there's residue on the end, so just put this back, put the end first, then you can slide it in the front part. Then there are teeth on here. Turn them to wherever the ratchet mechanism is. The ratchet mechanism here is on the bottom, so the teeth are facing the bottom. And you can just push it manually to take up any space like this. Then you're good to go. So now it just ratchets, and as you pull the trigger, it'll push out the caulking. So for this first step, I'm going to go over applying non-self-leveling caulk. So you have to tool it in, so you'll need to have your spackle knife ready. So I'm going to start out by first putting it into the crack. I'm going to let it overflow the crack a tiny bit just to make sure there's enough, so when I push it down in, it'll be level with the concrete. Once I've applied the bead of caulking, I'm going to get the spackle knife and span the width of the crack and just push along it. I'm aiming at flattening out the caulking as well as pushing it deep into the crack. If there are any areas where it pushed it in below flush, you could just add some more caulking and run it flat again. For this next part, I'm going to go over how to fill in the bigger cracks. So you need to put filler material just so you don't have to use as much caulking. I'm going to go over applying the expanding foam, the filler rod, and using sand. I'm going to go over expanding foam first. To use the expanding foam, you just fill it into the cracks. In this part, I'm only putting it in on the parts where chunks of concrete are missing, but you could also use it for a very wide crack, such as a 1/2 inch crack. You just put the nozzle in as far as it'll go and very carefully squeeze the trigger. You don't want to press all of it at once or it'll like immediately expand out of the crack. So move along very slowly and just pull the trigger every few seconds. This will keep the flow small, but will allow the filler to make a continuous bead. Once the foam is in the crack, you just need to let it expand and cure over the next 15 minutes. It'll get much larger. If there's any extending past the surface, you could just cut it off. For this next part, I'm going to go over applying the filler rod. This is my preferred method just because you could easily control it and it's fairly cheap. The foam itself also forms a seal, so even if the caulking fails, this will just be another measure of protection from water getting into the crack. So to do this, all you need is your spackle knife ready. Blow out the crack to make sure it's clean and start pressing it in. If you accidentally press it in too far, all you need to do is pull it back out and repress it in. So that's what makes it so easy. You could easily control the depth of how far you put it in. For this next part, I'm going to go over how to use the filler sand as the filler material. So all I'm doing is letting it flow into the cracks. Continues to drop, you just keep on adding more sand until it stops. I found it easiest to just fill in the sand all the way to the surface and then tool it in with a spackle knife. This will compact it and make sure that it doesn't run past once you start putting the caulk in. The thing you got to watch out for though is if the sand is too tall in the crack, then the caulking will just float on it and won't grab to the sides of the concrete. At that point, the caulking is not doing anything. So what I did is got the air gun, you could also use a broom, and just blow it from the side. This forces the sand out to a certain depth and it actually keeps the depth pretty uniform. So I just kept on blowing until it was the depth that I wanted, which is roughly 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deep. Once the bigger cracks are filled in, you could start with the caulking. I'm going to demonstrate how to use the self-leveling caulk here. It's fairly easy. You just put the tip of the caulk gun over the crack and start pulling the trigger. You want to fill it enough that it completely fills the crack and runs up the sides. If you don't fill it completely, then it's not doing its job. So make sure and add enough here. If you put it on too light, all you need to do is go back and add some more. It'll run itself together and make a flat surface. If you notice the caulking disappearing in a certain spot, there's likely a hole that you did not fill, and the more caulk you put in will just be wasted through. So I would suggest not filling any more in that spot and wait for the caulk to dry, then come back later and fill it in. The previously dried caulk will form a barrier and then it'll allow it to fill up to the top. Also, the technique of adding the self-leveling caulk is the same no matter which method you used as a pre-filler, whether it was the sand, expanding foam, or the filler rod. Also, I did not show using the self-leveling caulk on the smaller cracks because the technique is the exact same. The only difference is you did not have to use a pre-filler for it. The self-leveling caulk, even though it's very runny, is not runny enough that it'll go through the tiny 16-inch or 18-inch gap in the small cracks. And here is filling a big crack with the non-self-leveling caulk. The technique is the exact same as a small crack. You simply fill it in, make sure you put in enough that it'll fill the entire crack, and then just tool it in with the spackling knife. Once the first layer of caulking has dried, there will likely be some areas where it ran through. This is just caused by a big hole in the concrete that you weren't able to fill. So to fix these, you just go back over with some more caulking. Also, a trick you could use to make the caulking blend in with the existing concrete is right after you apply it, just sprinkle some sand over it and you could blow it away or sweep it off and it will appear just like the concrete and also have a texture to it. So for this next part, I'm going to show how to fill areas where there are big chunks of concrete missing. To fill these areas, I would not suggest using the caulking just because it would take half the can. For these areas, I mixed some water with some vinyl patching compound and just troweled it in. You need to make sure and wet the area. You don't want any sitting water, but it needs to be moist for it to stick to it. Then you just trowel it in and compact it and then let it dry. This will take a few days likely to completely cure, so you don't want to be driving over it within 24 hours. If this is a moving joint where the concrete is typically moving every year, this little patch will break, but once it cures, you'll be able to apply the caulking to it and you would just fill it like a normal crack. And here's the driveway after filling in about 90 feet of cracks. Thanks for watching.